What I'm going to be talking about today is my top 10 films of 2023. They are just my favorite movies of 2023. So, starting off with number 10, we have Killers of the Flower Moon. This is one of those films where, even though it's 3 hours long, you really don't mind it. It is always interesting, is the best way I can describe it. It's not really a entertaining film. It's, very serious, and its subject matter is very depressing because it's based off of actual murders and the complete elimination of a tribe of people. But the performances and Martin Scorsese's directing in the film are all top of their game. Between Scorsese's latest movies, Wolf of Wall Street, The Irishman, and this one is probably my favorite. And I thought both Wolf of Wall Street and Irishman were phenomenal films. At number 9, I have Asteroid City. Wes Anderson once again delivers another film that is just so entertaining, and if you really enjoy his style of filmmaking, this is right up your alley. Similar to how The French Dispatch was about writers and journalism, Asteroid City is Wes Anderson's dissection of actors and what it means to be in the moment as someone besides yourself. Something that, whether it's method acting or just what actors in stage productions kind of go through. And even if the pacing is a little slower than his other films, I found the back and forth scenes between the black and white and the stage production scenes to be really balanced, and it's one of those films that on rewatch I enjoyed a lot more on second viewing. Coming next at number 8 is The Killer. What is there to say that hasn't already been said about this film? Michael Fassbender is phenomenal in it, and it's one of those stories that I almost don't want to spoil, so I won't. But it's on Netflix, and it's one that I really recommend just kind of going in blind and just trust it. I thought it was really good. At number 7, I'm probably an outlier for this, but I have The Creator. Where most people thought it was probably just okay to good, I thought it was great. To have a somewhat high-budget, completely original sci-fi film from a director who has proven himself between directing 2014's Godzilla and Star Wars Rogue One, to have a completely new IP, something original and something high-budget, is just something we don't really see a lot these days. And the box office results that it had are almost disappointing to me, despite it being somewhat predictable and, maybe it's something that you've seen similar things to. I thought its execution was really excellent. And it was just one of those films that's similar to whether it's Logan or The Last of Us. I just found it very gripping. Yeah, it has an amazing cast. John David Washington, who is Denzel Washington's son. He was in Tenet, Black Klansman. The Creator to me was just a breath of much needed fresh air. And it was one of my favorite experiences as far as going to a cinema this year, especially here in Japan, where my theater was completely awestruck by it. At number 6, I have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. This is easily probably a lot of people's favorite movie of the year. Across the Spider-Verse is easily one of my favorite movies of the year. Seeing it opening night was the exact opposite of my experience seeing Into the Spider-Verse opening night. This time there was actually a large audience with anticipation. Back when Into the Spider-Verse came out, I felt like, especially opening weekend, not a lot of people saw it. It wasn't until word of mouth spread and it was on Netflix that it just kind of grew more and more popular the longer it was out. But Across the Spider-Verse essentially does everything that Into the Spider-Verse did so well and turns it to 11. The animation, story, characters, they all go bigger in this installment. Miles continues to grow as a character. And whereas Peter B. Parker had his arc in the first film, Gwen is given much more of a spotlight in this film. The opening 10-minute sequence, which in itself could be like a short film, is sort of setting the stage for what to expect. And really my only complaint with the movie is that it is half a film. It's only part one to a two-part story. So on its own, if let's say part two doesn't deliver, which I doubt it won't, but on its own, it isn't a complete film. And because it is the first half of a story, it can on rewatch get a little slow, but that's because it's the first act. All the time that Miles spends in Brooklyn and the relationship that's developed more with his family, all of that is very deliberate. And so while we don't know when Beyond the Spider-Verse is set to release, I'm sure with Lord, Miller, and the entire team involved that it will absolutely deliver. And that's why Across the Spider-Verse is so high on the list of films I saw this year. It's amazing. At number 5, we have The Boy and the Heron, or How Do You Live, as it's called here in Japan. I thought Spider-Verse was going to be the clear winner of Best Animated Film for 2023 when I saw it back in June. Then Miyazaki decided to come out of retirement and just drop another masterpiece. The Boy and the Heron is a gorgeous, thought-provoking, phenomenally directed and acted piece of art. It's a film that needs to be processed. It's very dreamlike and metaphorical, and its complex themes become, at least for me, more clear on second viewing. It's definitely a film that needs to be processed, and I think it's one of Miyazaki's most ambitious films. It's not laid back and easy like watching Kiki's Delivery Service or Porco Rosso. It's more in the same vein as Spirited Away or Howl's Moving Castle, except for me, I find this film to be better than both of those. On first watch, you might think it's disjointed, but when you take into the autobiographical element where it examines Miyazaki and his experience losing his own mother, and the almost callbacks to other films in his filmography, it's the more you think about it and ponder, the better for me it became. It really has that personal touch for Miyazaki where it feels like his blood, sweat, and tears all went into making this what might be his final film. It might be divisive amongst Ghibli fans, but I, for one, was completely enthralled by it. And I do think that the Japanese title of How Do You Live is definitely superior and better encapsulates what you should expect from the film. At number 4, I have Oppenheimer. When Barbenheimer came to America, I thought Barbie was going to be the film that I liked more. It had Greta Gerwig as director. It had Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling. The set design is phenomenal, 10 out of 10. I hope it wins an Oscar for that. But Oppenheimer, even with Nolan's name attached, it blew my expectations out of the water. It was so enthralling. And that's not to say that Nolan's other movies aren't enthralling, or to make an R-rated drama based on a true story, to make it so compelling is just, it's masterful. Nolan's script, which I think is the biggest part of why the movie works as good as it does, his screenplay, it needs to be studied. The way he uses time and perspective and color is something that I haven't really seen before in movies. And to have half of the film be in Oppenheimer's first person perspective, where it's a little bit more biased, and then we have that offset by the other half of the film that is following the court trials and Robert Downey Jr.'s role, and it's more black and white, third person, and we kind of get to see other viewpoints of Oppenheimer's actions and whether or not you can say he did the right thing, or what his punishment should be in his actions that led to the bombings that ended World War II, the creation of the atom bomb. Where the film, for me, if I have to have a nitpick, is that similar to Killers of the Flower Moon, it is 3 hours, but unlike Killers of the Flower Moon, I've rewatched Oppenheimer multiple times, even in its theatrical run, and I never found it to drag or found myself being bored. And on multiple viewings, when you sort of know the story, because on first viewing I didn't know the story, I found it so much easier to follow and really understand everything that happened, because the film, it spans decades. It is not small in scope. And the dropping of the first testing of a nuke, it's all practical, and I have no idea how Nolan executed it, but it is a sight to behold on the biggest screen you can see it in. It absolutely delivered. So Oppenheimer is easily one of the best films of 2023. At number 3, we have John Wick Chapter 4. John Wick Chapter 4 is almost the perfect ending. It's definitely a perfect adrenaline-filled action spectacular, but as far as ending the story of John Wick, it does have a single flaw in that it isn't a decisive ending. John Wick Chapter 4, while you can argue whether John dies or not at the end, it does leave it somewhat open. And with Lionsgate announcing that they are developing Chapter 5 and that there's more spin-offs on the way, like The Ballerina with Ana de Armas, and there was that Continental show that dropped earlier this year, the world of John Wick is definitely not over. Whether or not Keanu Reeves returns in the role, I'm sure is a matter of when it'll happen, not if it'll happen. But as for the film itself, John Wick Chapter 4 is the best in the series so far. It continues to one-up itself in its action set pieces, and the one take in the apartment that is Hotline Miami styles, just pure adrenaline, is the best action sequence of the year. It is so phenomenally crafted, and Keanu continues to just absolutely physically deliver in the role of John Wick. The final hour alone between that sequence and the staircase sequence is enough to watch the whole film over and over again. And it might be one of the best action films to come out of American cinema. The only thing off the top of my mind that I can compare it to that I think is a little better is really just The Raid and The Raid 2. John Wick Chapter 4 is the best in the series, and I don't know if it can be topped going forward. At number 2, much to my surprise, is Godzilla -1. I, as a child, really enjoyed the Godzilla franchise. I have all the old movies on DVD. I played the games. I had toys. The kaiju was always just a fun, sort of turn your brain off monster action franchise, where the movies to me are never really good movies, or where they struggle outside of maybe the original that came out over 50 years ago, is the human characters. They're always either boring or over the top, or they're just never well written. And even the recent MonsterVerse US films, whether it be Godzilla or King of Monsters or Godzilla vs. Kong, the human characters are never really the the bright spot of the film. You're always waiting for Godzilla to come back on screen. You're always waiting for the next fight. And these are 2-hour movies where 80% of them are people talking, and it always drags the films down. Yet with Godzilla Minus One, the humans are perhaps the best part of the film. Godzilla Minus One actually has really strong human characters, a strong story, and filmmaking that does the King of Monsters justice. The scenes in particular that stand out to me are the destruction of Ginza, the boat scene, and when Godzilla comes, and he's the only kaiju in the film, he's essentially the antagonist, there's this sense of dread and just overwhelming fear that everybody feels, and that includes the audience. And this is the first film in a long time out of the Godzilla movies where the scale and just absolute devastation of Godzilla is executed to absolute perfection. Even seeing this in a Japanese theater, seeing it opening day with a sold-out crowd with absolutely no English, so, every conversation, I wasn't completely able to understand what was being said. I still was able to get the emotion and the general gist of the story being told. And this is just one of those films that nails every aspect of the filmmaking. Godzilla Minus One sets a new standard for what these monster films can be. And next year's Godzilla, versus Kong has enormous shoes to fill, even to be near the same level as what I would consider a masterpiece for the Godzilla franchise. And at the end, for number 1, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. For a trilogy to end on its strongest note is rare. The only franchise off the top of my head that I can think of is Lord of the Rings, and that's arguable. But for a story to have a beginning, middle, and end that is the sole vision of one filmmaker is even rarer in the modern day blockbusters. In a world where Marvel and Disney have a tight grip on the films in the MCU, the Guardians of the Galaxy is a complete anomaly. The love and care that James Gunn has for these films is seen in every scene and character. I mean, leading up to the film's release, we all thought that someone was gonna die. Whether it be Rocket, because that's what the trailers were hinting towards, and it was his story, or maybe it'd be Drax, because, he has his wife and child that he could see again in death. Yet, Gunn completely subverts all these expectations completely, because not only does everybody survive, but everyone gets a heartwarming and earned send-off for their characters. You can tell that James Gunn wasn't going to kill anyone for shock value because he cared about everyone in this world that he created. Drax is given the chance to become a father again to a group of orphans that the Guardians save. And Rocket becomes the new leader of the Guardians, finding a purpose beyond his creation, and to take the role of leader when he for so long pushed everyone else away really brought himself full circle. Nebula is able to find a family in nowhere and a home in a world post-Thanos. Gamora, given the situation that Gunn was put in, found, I think, the best ending for her that could be found in finding a home with the Ravengers and finding happiness with them. And then Groot, he's still Groot, but my favorite ending for all the characters is actually Peter, Star-Lord, where he's able to come back to where it all began and return home to Earth. The idea of him returning to Earth is brought up a little abruptly in the film, but when it comes full circle with him returning to his grandfather, who he ran away from after the death of his mother in the opening scene of the first film, to tie back to that is just, it brings me to tears every time I rewatch that scene where he knocks on the door and he's anxious and scared, and in a universe that he's absolutely conquered and been so cocky and overconfident in himself, his ending feels so human. And then on another note for the film, the villain, who I'm going to mispronounce his name, but he's played by Chukwudi Iwuji, who previously worked with James Gunn on Peacemaker. The High Evolutionary is just this absolutely despisable piece of shit villain that you just want to see get absolutely beat. And similar to what Puss in Boots did last year in 2022 with Jack Horner, it's the kind of villain where he's just pure evil. And where the MCU has always had sort of a villain problem, it's easily the best villain in Gunn's trilogy, and it's one of the best villains in all of the MCU. The Guardians of the Galaxy not only stands as, in my opinion, the best trilogy to come out of Marvel, but Volume 3 stands as one of my favorite superhero films, period. With James Gunn going over to DC now, I really have high hopes with what he's putting together in his Superman film. And the stamp that he's left at Marvel in expanding their universe to space and beyond has really left the studio on one hell of a high note. And it's one of the reasons why Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is, without a doubt, my favorite movie of 2023. So yeah, that's my top 10 lists of the year. Let me know down below what your favorite films were. I'm sure mine are probably a little different. Maybe some of them are the same. But yeah, that's about it. Have a good one.